Earl Sweatshirt, in many people's eyes, gave us one of the best hip-hop albums of 2018. Some would even go as far as saying one of the best hip-hop albums of the 2010s as a whole. I would be one of those people. I put it in my top 100 albums of the decade list, and I did do an updated version of that fairly recently. I thought it'd be worth looking back to see which albums kind of, you know, came in, dropped out and stuff, and it still remains. So it's always going to be a potential hip-hop classic in years to come, I think, in many people's eyes. There was a pretty large vocal attack on the album though, with the way people were acting like it was mixed really badly. I don't think it was anything to do with the mixing. I think it was just the lo-fi aesthetic that Earl brings to his music that I don't think really people could come to terms with. I can see why you would feel that way, but I actually thought it created a really interesting atmosphere. It had some really introspective and really detailed lyrics as well, which was one of the main selling points for the album for me. I just think Earl was in a place that was obviously pretty dark, but he managed to pour that into the music, pour that into his writing in a pretty heartbreaking but also beautiful way. So naturally I was interested to see where Earl would go next, and I think Sick is a really strong follow-up album to some rap songs. He did drop an EP, so it's not the first music we've heard from him since 2018. I think that came out in 2019, but I think as a follow-up album, you can't really go wrong with this. It's an extension of what he was doing before, and it's really good. He has talked a little bit about how it's sort of like birthed out of the world of the coronavirus pandemic, and how, you know, people were locked away, and how he wrote these songs during those kind of like dark times where we couldn't leave the house and everything just felt like it was shit, basically. And I wouldn't necessarily say that's the overarching theme of the album. It's not like every track references that, but he sprinkles in some really interesting references throughout. Sick, the title track, is obviously the best example of this, where he says, you know, people can't go outside, they're too sick, things like that. I like how, you know, this album will be like a relic of its time, because I think if you listen to this album in years to come, you're going to hear a lyric like that and you're instantly going to be reminded of 2020 or even 2021 or 2022 basically at this point. I mean, let's not lie, it's not going away anytime soon. Some countries are still, you know, hammered down with the restrictions. The UK is not so bad, but there's always that looming sense of it could come back. And I feel like this album does a good job of that, because Earl's tone is always so kind of like dark and moody that it kind of gives off the sense that things aren't quite as good as they could be. Even if it's not necessarily in the lyrics, I feel like in his tone and in his style of the rapping, it feels like it's always there looming over you. And I think a track like Sick will remind you of that feeling when you hear this in years to come. I do feel like that's an interesting thing to look back on with this kind of album, because like I say, he's not always talking about it, but the lyrics are there, and I think that's quite interesting. I really like the Fela Kuti reference, of course. Anything referencing Fela Kuti is always a good thing. But yeah, I enjoy the production on this one. It's got that lo-fi feel to it again, but I do feel like actually some of these tracks step out of his comfort zone with what he's been expected to do. Particularly a track like 2010. I feel like the shimmering production on this track is so unique for anything Earl's put out in the past few years. I guess East was a taste of the unique kind of beats he could find himself rapping over from Feet of Clay, but this one isn't quite as controversial as that track, I don't think. Black Noise handles the production on many of these songs, and every time I see him listed as a producer, I'm just like, man, this beat is fantastic. Titanic is another one produced by Mr. Black Noise himself. One of my favourite Earl songs, I think, ever, actually. The squashy beat sounds so creative to me. I just don't really recall any time Earl has ever rapped over something like this. And it just sounds so cool. It almost sounds like a wonky electronic producer would be like getting their hand in this, just adding those little splashes that you'd expect from that kind of album, and yet it's being transformed into an Earl Sweatshirt track, and he's flowing really cool on this one as well. This is a great track. I think this is the best track on the album, to be honest. And the Black Noise production continues to be really great, with the final track as well, Fire in the Hole. Got a noir feel to it as well. Really like the Bootsy Collins reference, and also there's an interesting reference just going back to Titanic with the mask reference, and then he says Daniel. Almost feels certainly a reference and a nod to MF Doom. Not guaranteed, but I feel like there's been a lot of comparisons and, you know, people saying over the years that Earl Sweatshirt is influenced by MF Doom. Wouldn't really be surprised if this was the case on this track, this reference. But yeah, great produced tracks. A Lie is another good track as well I like on this album. The Alchemist is handling the production on this one, and the opening track too. Was surprised to not see a bit more of Alchemist throughout the album. Not that I'm saying I wanted more, I think there should be more, but I just thought there might have been more production from him, despite, you know, him only being on a few tracks. Usually when you see him, he's on like a lot more tracks. We have some cool features on Tabula Rasa from Arm & Hammer, Elucid and Billy Woods. Elucid, man, sounds so cold on his verse. And these guys sound really great over this production as well. It's a lot different to the most recent Arm & Hammer album, Haram. That production was very, like, you know, claustrophobic and heavy, whereas this production feels a bit more open, a bit more spacious. Gives them more of a spotlight on them, I feel, which I like, and I think the production, again, is really fantastic here. And Earl kills it with the verse. He closes out the track as well. What's the line he says? Streets ablaze with anger, complacency, and deceit create. So yeah, that's a cool line. Streets ablaze with anger, complacency and deceit create. That's such a cool way to word something, man. And again, referencing the time period we're in, there was so much animosity, anger about being kind of held in the restrictions, and, you know, in a lot of ways due to the, I guess, complacency that the government may have just slipped into by not doing enough to make sure the pandemic doesn't, you know, absolutely implode in the way it did. Again, another little reference to a time that we will not forget. Just love the wording of that though. So yeah, I mean, there's loads to praise about this album. I mean, once again, it is as short as you'd expect Earl to have given us over the past few albums. He's not really, you know, shying away from this short album idea that he keeps giving us. I don't think it's a bad thing either. I think it fits his style, you know what I mean? It's exactly what you want from Earl. He couldn't make these tracks, you know, 5-6 minutes. You'd get pretty bored, surely. I will say there are some tracks that could be a bit longer though. I mean, some of these tracks I really like, and then I feel like they just go away so quickly, which is a bit of a shame. And I feel like the track like Lobby is a good example of that, where the beat just feels like it could snap really hard. It could build into something that just really like propels and propulses you, but it's done before you even like get time to think about what it could become. And I just think he could extend songs like this. They don't need to be that short. But overall, I really like this. I mean, in terms of replayability, I don't know if it's got the same replay value as some rap songs, although saying that could age badly, because there was always extra little snippets of lyrics that you picked up on every time with some rap songs, and that could be the same with this one. But I don't necessarily feel as though this album has like the overarching theme that some rap songs did. I don't necessarily always feel like, you know, Earl is sticking to specific topics. But that being said, maybe it's just one of those albums that requires more attention to detail. You know, as I go on, I'll hear interesting moments that I didn't pick up on the first time. Earl is certainly one of those rappers, one of those kinds of rappers. But yeah, I think this is a very, very strong album. I'm going to go 7.5 out of 10. I think that could easily rise to an 8 if I do go back to it and pick up on things that I haven't necessarily picked up on at this moment in time. But even still, I mean, that's a very strong score regardless. Earl is once again proving that he is a force to be reckoned with in the modern day of hip-hop music. And yes, really good stuff, really good stuff. Some great production once again from the people working with Earl. Some great rapping as well, a cool tone that's being created throughout. Earl's out here killing it, and I'm sure many people will absolutely adore this album. Let me know your thoughts in the comments if you like it. If you don't like it, I would love to hear as well. Thank you for watching as always. Have a good day. Subscribe if you haven't already, and goodbye.